When I was working through the instrumental music stuff, one of the things that dawned on me that I think would help people really understand the Bible better is if they understood the history of Israel. All right, that's a Bible section. Probably take me a couple of weeks to work you through it, depending on how many questions you have and how much you want to really discuss the stuff. There are New Testament texts. Look at Romans chapter 15. This is the one that we quoted the most. Romans 15:4 used to kind of roll off Church of Christ members' tongue. For whatsoever things were written aforetime were written for our learning, that we through patience and comfort of the Scriptures might have hope. That's Paul's way of saying that the Scriptures were written for our benefit. But now, see if you answer this question right. In Romans 15:4, what would Paul have been referring to as Scriptures? Old Testament, no question. Because Old Testament Scriptures would have been Paul's Bible, would have been Jesus' Bible, because they didn't have the New Testament Scriptures. Paul wrote half of the New Testament Scriptures. Look at 1 Corinthians chapter 10, and I'll just kind of hit these pretty carefully. He goes down through talking about Israel in chapter 10. Israel came out of the land of Egypt, and they did a lot of things. Verse 6 underlined. He says, now these things were our examples to the intent we should not lust after evil things as they also lusted, neither be ye idolaters as were some of them, as it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. Verse number 11. Now all these things happened unto them for in samples, and they were written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world are come. So you've got all these New Testament texts, is what I'm saying, that say the Old Testament Scriptures are good for us, written for us, for our good benefit. The problem is, from a historical kind of perspective, we quoted those texts sometimes for a different purpose. Like I've been in gospel meetings and heard Romans 15:4 on Monday night. The things that were written aforetime were written for our learning, that we through patience and comfort of the Scriptures might have hope. But a primary reason for doing that on Monday night was so that when you got to Wednesday night and started talking about instrumental music and some of those things, and somebody had a question about it, your general answer was, that's in Old Testament and we're not under Old Testament law. And that's not the best answer to me. As a matter of fact, what I'm pretty sure about is that a right understanding of those Old Testament texts give us better answers relative to instrumental music. Anybody want to talk about that? That's a pretty big statement. That right understanding of those texts will give us better understanding of why I think we should not use instrumental music, rather than just dismissing it wholesale. Anybody? All right, so let me just first of all write a section up here, and if I'm in somebody's way, I can kind of move back or out of the way or something. Okay. So what would you do if you were talking about Old Testament scriptures? What would you primarily call the history of Old Testament Israel?
I would go back to Abraham at a minimum.
Go back to Abraham at a minimum. That's right. You got to think about it. I was just telling him a little earlier that one of the problems I think with the Bible reading is people don't digest it. They read across it, but they don't digest it equals really try hard to understand what it's really saying and put it in order. Now, I've gone through some of this before, but he would go back. Abraham, I'm okay with that. I would say that you're still kind of pre-Israel because Abraham had Isaac, Isaac had Jacob, Jacob had 12 boys. The two that I want to talk about are Joseph and Judah. And this one is important because this is how you get into Egypt. This is how you get to Jesus. And one other boy, Kohath, Amram, Moses. That's how you get to Moses. So we went into Egypt in Joseph's day, and we came out 4 generations later under Moses' leadership. During this 430 years, God turned 70 into 600,000 men besides women and children. And that's how you get the nation. Now, did I lose anybody? Because if I lost you, I don't want to. And I don't want to make it sound like that's just really, really, really hard to understand. Sometimes when you go through people, people kind of think that's hard. And I'm telling you that it is not hard. It's easy. Question, comment there. All right, once you get this 600,000 men plus women and children under the leadership of Moses, Moses led them out of Egypt, play like over there, that's wrong direction, but he led them out of the land of Egypt, and they're headed over there to the promised land, back to the promised land. And that's the nation that I'm wanting to talk about. There are a lot of things to say in here when you talk about the nation of Israel, really named Prince of God. His name in origin was Jacob, and so his name changed from hill grabber, supplanter, to Prince of God. And this nation of Israel sort of becomes like God's special man. Really, it's a nation, but kind of like God's special people. Anybody? Go.
Joseph is not a tribe. He's not considered a tribe.
He is a tribe equals He is one of the 12 boys that belonged to Jacob. But he got sold off into Egypt, and Pharaoh gave Joseph an Egyptian wife. Trying to see where I am. Sometimes I just want to know where I am but you know what I've always wondered? I bet Joseph's Egyptian wife is probably half black. That's just, she's an Egyptian, is what I'm saying. He probably married, huh?
Egypt is still in Africa.
Egypt is, that's right. So I've always kind of thought, and a little later, Moses married an Ethiopian woman, and his siblings were mad at him about that. But I think even before Moses, probably Joseph married Asenath and had the answer to your question. That's just Harold read all that other stuff. Don't worry about that because that's not in the Bible. That's just me. Had Ephraim and Manasseh. So a lot of times when you're talking about the tribe of Joseph in the Bible might just call that Ephraim or Manasseh or something like that, because when you say there is no tribe of Joseph, that's right. But there is a tribe of Ephraim and there is a tribe of Manasseh. And when they got back to the promised land, Manasseh wanted some land on the east side of Jordan for their cattle, and Moses granted them that. And so there are little sections of Manasseh on both sides of the Jordan River. Yo, go ahead.
Excuse me, in that section of the country, I'm not saying, what color for those people? I mean, I know that, had a lot of sunshine, but overall, what was their color?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I hate to.
No, I think those are good questions. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time with it, but because I don't think it matters that much, but I do want to tell you something that's true. If you're looking for, for a while, black people sort of came along and said, like it was some kind of discovery that black people were in the Bible. I think that just flows out of American slavery and segregation. But that's not, I don't see how a person can read the Bible and not figure out that there are all kinds of people in the Bible. It's part of what I think I'm talking about, Paul, when I say they didn't digest it. You wouldn't have to do a major discovery to find out that there are black people in the Bible. Any color people in the Bible, in this world, probably in the Bible. The answer to your question is those people are kind of like us, but varied in color. Like if you just do an average Jew, you'd be a darker skinned person, but they would be different. One of the things I used to do when I was teaching is I would take an encyclopedia picture that I found one day, and I probably still have it somewhere, but it's pretty big fold out, and it's about races of people in the world. And if you look at that carefully, what you'll discover is they're all kinds of colored people in this world. And so that if a person gets hung up in those little old areas, you're going to just be hung up unnecessarily because they are really in this world. Don't you doubt it at all. Go.
I think that it's important to us as African Americans because of the psychological damage that was done to us us that flowing from slavery, because in gospel advocate, and we were growing up and we never saw, you know, any depictions of anybody other than white people. And the white Jesus is the most
Now, if you're
famous Jesus in the world.
if you're a man, and in the next section, remember what she just said, because I'll show you a lot of things. That's really right. We kind of bought into a bunch of stuff, and I'm gonna get back where I'm going, but we bought a bunch of stuff because of slavery and segregation and the dominant race in America, and that's caused a bunch of problems. But it's not valid. Never has been valid. Anybody who believes it is kind of another world as far as I'm concerned, because it's just not true. All right, this is the part of the history of Israel that I think people ought to kind of put in their mind, and really, if you start with the leadership of Moses, and then Moses led these people for 40 years and died and turned that over to Joshua. So it'd be Moses, Joshua. When Joshua died, there was no leader like those men, and so you hit a period of judges. During that judges period, we go in a circle cycle. We serve God, and then we sin, and we get captured, and we cry out, and God raises up a judge to deliver us, and typically we serve the Lord all the days of that judge, and then we sin, and we go in that circle cycle. That's 450 years, though, until finally Israel says, we want a king. And we got a king, and then that king actually led us off into exile, and we were there in Babylon 70 years and returned. Now, I left out a major section because in the days of the kings, the kingdom split, and the large majority of us went into Assyrian exile. But if you do something like that, you're doing the history of the nation of Israel. And if you don't do that, and you try to read the Bible, my guess is you're going to mess up stuff because you probably won't know where you're reading. Anybody? What you're doing here in Moses' day, you're kind of in the law typically. So that would make you make the nation, come up out of the land of Egypt and all of that. And typically in the Bible, that's Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, which this is how you make the nation. This is the Exodus from the land of Egypt, and then the law. And then it's almost kind of like that. Once you get to Deuteronomy, it's Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles. I'm trying to think of how much I want to talk about this. 1st and 2nd Kings is kind of like 1st and 2nd Chronicles. there's a lot that will shorten this. If you do Genesis and Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, don't do this, but you kind of can. By the time you get to Deuteronomy, most of what you read in Deuteronomy will be in Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers. And by the time you get here, most of what you read in 1st and 2nd Chronicles will be in 1st and 2nd Kings for the most part. And then as you end Kings, you're kind of going into exile. And when you go into exile, you'll come out. I tell people you go in 3 different deportations. In the end of the Kings, Jehoiakim, Zedekiah, and you come out in the days of Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther. But Esther is an example of a queen who did quite well in Babylonian captivity, and she didn't come back. The leaders of the returns back are Zerubbabel, that's temple, Nehemiah, that's the walls, and Ezra, who wants to restore and take them back to the law of God, because he knows that their departure from the law of God is what caused them to go into exile in the first place. All right, that's kind of a huge history, cursory history. All right, ask questions about that, because I'm going to tell you why I think we need to really get that in our minds right. If we get that section of the Bible in our minds right, I think nothing that happens to the church will really shock us, because it's already happened. I mean, it's happened before. It's probably going to happen again. It's the same stuff, kind of in a different context, but it's the same stuff. And that, like I said, that's pretty cursory, but it's also pretty telling if you look at it holistically. That we had a law of God, and then we just left God and kept going further and further and further away from God until he took us off into Babylonian exile. When I say Babylon, I know that the Assyrian exile happened, but Babylon is the remnant to come from here to get us down to Jesus Christ. So that goes there. It's kind of like this guy takes us into Egypt. This guy brings us out. This guy takes us to Jesus. Okay, go. The church, yeah, I think you're right about it. What I'm saying is the church, in my judgment, not everybody, but the church has failed to see this as their background story. As a matter of fact, what a lot of people have done in the church, in my judgment, is kind of gotten rid of that part of our story. So let me say it another way and see if you even hear what I'm saying. Some people will come down here. See, when I do this too much, I think I'm confusing people because they don't really know where I am. Do you know that if I say, when we come down here, that I really stretch that line out all the way across to the wall? Do you understand that? Yeah. If you don't understand that, then I'm a bad teacher, and I don't want to be that. I want you to understand what I'm talking about. I think a lot of people come all the way down here, get to Jesus, make a church, and start that church in their mind some kind of way, and then jump over all the history and come to where we are in Memphis, Tennessee in 2025, and it's like all that stuff behind us didn't happen. And it did happen.
You think that people think you don't need the Old Testament to be saved?
I think that. I believe that to a pretty big extent. But I do not want to teach people that you don't need the Old Testament for your understanding, because you do need it for your understanding. Particularly if you're going to come in, let's say in this group that's coming in a little while, our men, and we're going to lead something. It's bad to be trying to lead with a real shallow understanding. You need a deeper understanding of who we are. How many of you know a little bit about your genogrammic background? Like just a little bit. How does that make you feel, knowing a little bit about who you are?
Pretty good.
Man, I'm glad I know who I am. I mean, I'm glad I know. I want to know. I would be disappointed if I didn't know. That's the same thing here. This is our story. It's our church story, and this stuff is really foundational in our story. Really foundational. Go.
It seems to me that if we did not know the history, Old Testament, even if we felt like that Jesus was the beginning and the end, which he is, but to understand like sacrifices, what that means, and to understand what some of the king, we say that Jesus is king. What does that mean? We know somewhat, but by studying the kings, and we understand that he's a better king. And we understand his sacrifice is a better sacrifice. And we understand that he's better than what they had,
Yeah.
and what brought us here. So,
I'm going to tell you another way to think about it.
he's a better high priest and a better king.
Yeah. If we really just didn't need any of that for anything, what in the world God give it to us for?
Because he wanted us
God thought,
Jesus.
I think God thought this is good for their understanding of who they are. And if you read the sermons from people like, I'll give you an assignment. Go read Stephen's sermon in Acts 7. And what Stephen's going to do in his sermon is go way back here and come down through all of that, as he lays a foundation and got stoned to death, and this stuff will get you stoned. I'm here to tell you, he got stoned for that, but he died with such good faith. that this is what lays your foundational faith and makes you really believe in the revelation of God. A person who says, I have really good faith in God, and I don't know anything about that, I'd look at him a little bit funny. I'd say, okay, and let him have it. I mean, I'm not going to argue with him all day, but I don't quite believe that. Go.
I thought the Israelites held to the law all the way to the end of the Old Testament.
To the New Testament too.
They didn't hold to the law. That's why I think we need to learn this history. They were supposed to have been governed by the law. Kind of like we are today historically as members of the churches of Christ. We're supposed to be governed by the Bible, and we have the Bible, but in a lot of cases we're a little distant from that Bible. And so really what happened, all right, anybody lost so far and don't have what I'm talking about? Because I'm going to erase this and show you really what happened and why you shouldn't be totally surprised today at what happens in the church. All right, this is what happened really, and this is kind of a response to Danier's point and a part of what I think we ought to understand about the history. We did pretty good with the law in the days of the lawgiver, and we did pretty good in the days of Joshua and the elders that outlived Joshua, and then we hit this period of Judges, that cycle I was telling you about, and we started cycling downward. And the further you go down there, the further you are removed from the law. Now, let me show you what I'm trying to say. Oh, Zella, just listen for just a little while. You don't have to listen long, and I'll let you talk again. When you come here, always in exile. Always in exile. Once God punishes his people, those are the same people that he will turn around and use to save everybody. But, for example, if you come up out of exile here, where's that going? If I come up out of exile in this story,
Bring all the nations together.
how?
Well, he
Don't be scared. You were kind
he
of,
did not want us.
no, okay, let me tell you the how. In Jesus, that's exactly right. He brings us back together in Jesus. Exile is a pathway to Jesus, through whom all the nations of the earth were reconciled into one. I just did a little bit better than you, because I figured you was going to take too long, and my time is running out. Go.
Excuse me, but what do we do with Genesis 11? And Christ wanted us unified. What do we do?
Well, we just take Genesis 11. All you're doing in Genesis 11, especially at the end of, with the Tower of Babel, you're just dividing the world. Because we sinned. Anytime you see exile, There's sin connected to it, don't you doubt it. That's what makes me say it's not like him to allow that. Anytime you see it, we got a problem.
But why do we embrace this black and white when God wants us Jesus died so we would be unified in him?
Because there's a creature called Satan
Loves chaos.
who loves chaos in any kind of context. Anything that opposes the God of heaven. Anything. He is so sorry. Anyhow, here we go. I'm going to give Moselle another 2 minutes and then I'm going to finish. Go.
Okay, well, all I gotta say is this, that, you know, the implications of exile is that people sin and they did something wrong. And I will submit and to the court that, that the Africans were innocent, that we were kidnapped, and that we were mistreated. We were not doing nothing wrong. We were minding our own business. Well, but there were a whole lot of people idolaters. You know, a whole lot of people idolaters. And they
See what she's doing? Can you tell?
No,
Keep going.
it is myself and my folks.
She's trying to defend us. I'm trying to understand. That's the difference. Like she's trying to defend us. All right, I'm going to tell you what I don't want to defend. I just want to understand it. Because I think these are my foundational people, just like my physical foundational people. And I can't do anything with it. When I tell you, listen carefully, and then I'll quit because my time's up. When I tell you that I am a Christian and a member of the body of Christ on my way to heaven, I didn't tell you nothing about my ancestors. Them people are raggedy as a can of kraut. And I know it, and I know the whole story. And if I go back through my father to my grandfather to my great-grandfather, there's stories in there that you don't even need to know. Because like I called my mama one time. The library was still over there on McLean. And I said, Mother, I learned looking through microfilm at the McLean Peabody Library that Mama, that was my grandmother, I said, I learned that she'd been married before. I said, did you know anything about that? Long pause. You know when the long pause happens. Long pause. She said, yeah, I knew it. I said, oh, did nobody ever tell us anything about that? That's the first thing I ever heard about that. She said, way before your time, you didn't need to know nothing about that. All right, that's not true. I did want to know something about it. A lot of things happened way back there that you didn't know anything about, and all them old folk would ever tell. There were a lot of reasons for that I'm not trying to do. I'm just trying to show you that the sin and evil up here is just like the sin and the evil all the way down to the bottom here. The sin and evil is what's causing the demise. It's our departures from God. What I just told you about my physical family is a part of why I keep trying to tell people that if you keep on departing from God and you go 10 generations, your family is liable to self-destruct. Talking to a man yesterday, and we were talking about eternal. He said he was teaching a class, and he asked a question. Can anybody? What's worse than losing your soul in hell? And he said some lady in the class said nothing. But somebody else said, yeah, there's something worse than that. Losing your soul in hell and looking over, and they're all your children, and you're the reason they went there. See, that's worse. They're all your children, and you caused all of that. That would be worse than going to hell. If I look over there and see somebody, I'm going to say I did a good job because, see, I'm going to be in heaven. Y'all have to tell me about what goes on the other side. I'm not going down there. I don't want to fool around down there. I have nothing down there. Now, we get here in the Judges, and a lot of people think we get a king and we do better. I think we get a king, it keeps going that way, straight on down to Babylonian exile. All right, it's the understanding of the history, not history like spiraling downward. I'm talking about the details of these historical matters. In other words, what I think the church needs to understand is King Saul and what happened. David split the kingdom and go Jeroboam and Rehoboam, Abijah, Asa, Jehoshaphat. We need to learn those stories. There's information in those stories. They're not just people and they're not just circles going downward. They are examples that teach us and show us. And that's what we've got to get. We'll do a lot better in our understanding of the church if we learn these stories.